Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome to our Holistic Care and Wellness series. This event is being presented by Interchurch Health Ministries, which is based in Whitby, Ontario, Canada. And the land on which we live and worship is covered under the Williams Treaty and is within the traditional territories of the people of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We acknowledge this land out of respect for Indigenous nations and in an effort to remember the history and to work towards reconciliation and respectful relationships. My name is Clarence McPherson, and I am serving as chairperson of Interchurch Health Ministry Canada. I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Anne-Marie Moeller and Carol Beam, who are both parish nurses and board members with the Interchurch Health Ministry. Before introducing our featured guest, I'd ask that you use the chat window to post your name and location and any questions or comments during the presentation. Also, be sure to complete the poll that we posted. Now, Carol will be moderating the posts and she'll share them during the question and answer segment. So at this point, I'd like to ask Anne-Marie to get us started with an introduction of our special guest speaker.
Thank you, Clarence. Nobody knows more about parish nursing than Reverend Dr. Helen Wordsworth. I'm delighted that Helen could be with us today. Helen is a registered nurse. She's a Baptist minister with 16 years of experience in mission enabling at the regional level with all denominations. Helen's a registered nurse, as I said, a nurse educator, the founder of Parish Nursing UK, associate fellow at Durham University Department of Theology. Helen was given the award of the Queen's Nurse title for her work in developing parish nursing in the UK. Helen currently works with the Westburg Institute for Faith Community Nursing as an international parish nurse consultant. Helen is also the author of Rediscovering the Ministry of Health, Parish Nurse as the Mission of the Church. Helen, we're so pleased to have you. Do you want to say any kind of opening hellos before we go on to questions?
Just really grateful to be here and to have this opportunity to share something. It's good to be here. So good to know that there are quite a lot of people out there listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Helen, so let's get to it. What is holistic ministry and why is it so important?
Well, holistic care ministry is otherwise known as whole person care ministry. I think that's the name I like better. And it's a form of Christian ministry that covers all aspects of a person's health life. And that means physical, mental, social, spiritual, and environmental. And it's important to recognize that although these are different facets of our life, they are integrated. So when one facet is suffering, then the others may also be affected. And when all facets are addressed, then a person can feel a real sense of wellness and healing, even if cure is not possible, and even if their abilities may be limited. It's important because wholeness is foundational to a Judeo-Christian worldview based on the Holy Scriptures. And yet many of the world's institutions try to compartmentalize all these facets. So this stems from the Greek ideas of separation of body from soul. It's sometimes called dualism. And they separate material from spiritual. And you can see that in many different places through academia, in healthcare, in publishing, and even in church. Because sometimes we tend to separate off the spiritual side of life and leave the rest to others to care for. So getting back to whole person care is what we need to do. And we can do it in partnership with those who can help us.
Thank you, Helen. Can you share with us some of the theological foundations for health ministry?
Yes, certainly. I'd love to do that. It's not just a practical response, this idea of getting involved with the other facets of care. It comes from a deep understanding of our faith and where it comes from. So wholeness is something that we find in the Bible, something that we find as a theological foundation, if you like. I've identified others too, but this one, I would start with Genesis chapter 1, the very first 2 verses of the Bible, where we read that the Spirit of God moved over the waters. So we have the spiritual elements and the material elements coming together in creation. And we see that they're interactive. We see them playing out all the way through Scripture. God's Spirit is to be worshipped in spirit and in truth. And yet he's not distant. He loves the world that he created, and he's intimately involved with the physical life of people. He gives them responsibilities for creation care, for practical instructions, living well in community. He provides a means of forgiveness when we don't get it right. And he reminds us to care for the poor. And he sends his Son to establish his kingdom and bring people the life in all its fullness that God intends for them. He demonstrates this through his healing ministry. And when Jesus heals people, he often addresses their spiritual need as well as their physical need. So perhaps something about their sins or their level of faith as well as their sickness. And yet Jesus himself suffers deeply through his passion and death. He knows what it's like to suffer. And he's raised to new life by God's Holy Spirit. And his followers then receive that Spirit. Do you see the interaction that's happening here? And that Spirit guides them in everyday living and witness. So ultimately, spirit and matter come together completely as Christ returns to fulfill his kingdom for eternity. And then the world will be completely whole. There will be no more violence, no more weeping, and no more pain.
So Helen, are there other theological foundations that you'd like to share?
Yep. There's a strong missional foundation for health and healing. Rebecca Rian Evans is a writer who points out that in Christian theology, we're healed to serve, healed so that we might serve others. And the 72 followers of Jesus in Luke 10 are sent into the villages, and they're sent to heal and to say that the kingdom of God is near them. So those 72 are bringing together the spiritual side of life and also the physical side. And it occurred to me that if all that we do as churches is to preach or to look after the spiritual side of things, then we're actually missing a vital part of gospel ministry. And if all we do is confined to those who happen to come to church, then we're not doing what Jesus meant us to do. And I think there's another foundational element, and that is the one of respect. Respect for the individual's right to choose. And this is another theological foundation, because Jesus was very clear that people have choice. When the rich man walked away on hearing the cost of discipleship, Jesus was sad, but he let him go. And he didn't force anyone to follow him. If someone doesn't want to receive care from the church, we should be willing to refer them on to somewhere else, if that is their wish. And if they're from a different faith, we should respect that faith. That doesn't mean we have to pray to their God, but it does mean that we should be very careful to observe the practices that they observe and not to offend them in any way. So that if they ask to be referred on to someone of their own faith, then we should be willing to do that, just as we would refer them on to somebody in a different profession if that's what they ask of us. And then there's another one, the theology of vocation. Nearly all of the 300 nurses who over the years have applied for the UK course wrote that they felt a call from God towards parish nursing. Most of the people we read about in the Bible also had that sense of call. And one of my favorite definitions of call is this one from Frederick Buechner. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet.
So when we talk about mission, Helen, and we're not just talking about the mission of the church, we're talking about mission for the world.
Yeah.
Can you help us a bit, Helen, with how can the church be a place of health and healing today, especially during the challenging times?
Yeah. COVID has taught us many things. And we've learned that we need to do whatever we can to prevent the spread of viruses. We need to promote vaccination, and we need to support those who work in the healthcare services. But it's also reminded everyone across the world of the value of community, the importance of caring for one another, the need to spread kindness and to connect with the lonely. And these are all biblical themes. So it would be surprising if the church were not at the forefront of that kind of support. And even more importantly, the one thing the church can offer, in addition to all these things, is that sense of hope. If the gospel's to be seen as relevant to everyday life as we believe it is, then we need to engage in this way, not just with our own congregations, but outside into the communities. We need to be there.
So very much looking at church not happening within the four walls, engaging the community in that mission.
Yeah.
Helen, can you talk a bit about the background of church health ministry and parish nursing?
Yeah. Churches have been involved in health and healing ministries from the very beginning. There are records of the health and healing ministry in Acts and in the New Testament letters. And monks and nuns started many of our hospitals. You can actually see the remains of some of them around the world. There's one in Bruges in Belgium, and you can still see the paintings of Bible stories on the walls of the wards. And the idea was that patients would look at these paintings while they recovered. And then I found a book, a fascinating book recently about how clergy use various herbal remedies to minister to the sick. This one is the Village Pastor's Surgical and Medical Guide, and it's a reprint of a book that was published in, I think it was around about 1830s, and it was a guy who was giving advice to the village clergy in the areas around Peterborough, and they were then able to offer some kind of health care as well as the spiritual care. So in my own denomination, in the 19th century, they had deaconesses, and these deaconesses were, they had to be nurses first before they could do any theological training. And then there were some people called Bible nurses, actually active in London. And that was at the beginning of the 20th century. They were called Bible nurses because in addition to all the other things they carried in their medical bag, there was a Bible. So why did all that disappear, you might ask? Well, in the UK, and probably in some other countries too, the state gradually took over healthcare. And as it did, the involvement of the church gradually diminished, to the extent that in the last part of the 20th century, nurses were discouraged from any kind of spiritual care intervention. Actually, the pendulum has swung back quite a bit now, and it's generally recognised that spiritual care is important. But there's also an openness to partnership with voluntary organisations, including faith communities. So actually now the door is open for churches to work together with health providers. And in the US in the 1980s, Granger Westberg, a Lutheran hospital chaplain, was concerned about so many patients arriving with preventable conditions or complications of their illnesses. And he saw the potential for nurses to work with congregations in health promotion. And he recruited the first 6 parish nurses in the Chicago area. The work grew. The Parish Nurse Resource Center was formed, now called the Westberg Institute for Faith Community Nursing. And it provides a regularly updated curriculum and draws together nurses from across the world in a symposium every year. And around about the same time as this was happening, Canada quickly took up the initiative and developed an education program and a support network. And Interchurch Health Ministries and the Canadian Association for Parish Nurse Ministry became the national organisations in Canada. Australia and New Zealand soon followed, and the UK programme started in 2003. And in the UK, our national organisation offers the Foundations course that happens twice a year from the Westberg curriculum, and it has around 100 currently practicing parish nurses in about 85 churches of all denominations, with regional coordinators to support them.
It's a lovely overview, Helen. Just thinking about our own province of Ontario here in Canada, and we also have education programs. I mean, ICHM used to do that, but they're focusing more on health ministry now. But St. Peter's Seminary offers a foundation program, and I know the Lutheran Church is very involved in parish nursing, and Taylor Seminary as well. So lots of great partnerships and moving parish nursing and health ministry forward.
Yeah.
Helen, let's talk a little bit about the practices of holistic care, ways to do that for self, for one another, and for the planet.
Yeah, several organisations have actually put together some models for whole person care. And I personally like the ones that are based on biblical values, because I think that's the gift that we have to offer. And the ones that include caring for creation, as well as physical, mental, spiritual, and social elements. And if you have a model for care, it means that you have some way of asking questions, some criteria, if you like, about the way that you're living. For example, you might want to give yourself a score out of 10 for each element. And there are several models. There's a simple model for holistic care based on the life of Jesus. And this is drawn up by Anne Solari Twaddell, who was one of the very first nurses, parish nurses in Chicago. And she took the life of Jesus and noted there were several things about it which could be helpful in our own lives. The fact that he had a sense of belonging, the fact that he had helpers, that he prayed a lot, that he spent time on his own in solitude, that he exercised a lot, he ate healthily, all of those kinds of things. He had lots of support. He loved others and he persevered in times of difficulty. So all those things are things that we could perhaps apply to our own lives and work out which of those things do we need to work harder at. And then there's another one as well that you might like to look at. It's the Wheel of Health offered by Church Health Center in Memphis. And this is where you take a segment and you look at the segment in terms of how you're doing and give yourself a score out of 10 on each of those segments. And again, that gives you a bit of guidance as to where you need to invest a little bit more time. And so those kinds of things can be quite helpful. There are quite a few of them around. These aren't the only two. But neither of these actually include environmental care. And I think especially with COP26 just behind us, we need to think very carefully about how our activities of daily living have an effect on the planet.
Thank you. Just want to talk a bit about spiritual care. There's many definitions of spiritual care, but I'm wondering if you could share with us how you practice living whole as an individual.
Yeah. The word spiritual care, or the term spiritual care, has had quite a lot of criticism, I suppose, because it's not easy to define. But there are many people who've tried to define it. And one of the things that has helped me to begin to understand what they mean is a definition from Professor Arndt Bussing, who is a theologian in Germany. And he's suggested that all of the definitions relate to 4 different domains. The first one is relationship with God or a higher being. The second one is a sense of identity, purpose, hope in life. The third one, the search for peace and forgiveness. And the fourth one, the need for connection with others. And so if we're going to be spiritually whole, it isn't just about our relationship with God, although of course that's the first one, that's very important. But it's also about what purpose God has for us and the identity that he gives us. And the job or the purpose that he has for us in life, calling us to serve others. And then we also need to think about how we can be at peace. So at peace means knowing that we are forgiven, knowing that we can cast all our anxieties on him, and forgiving one another as he forgives us. And then we must seek to nurture our relationship with others, be they friends or family or local community, because everybody needs somebody. Everyone needs to reach out and be reached. And we're not meant to live life alone. So these 4 domains are what I would kind of define as spiritual care. And those are the things we need to do alongside the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the social side of life, and the environmental side of life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those dimensions with us, Helen. So what are the characteristics of a holistic congregation? What does that look like?
Well, if we take what I've been saying about whole person health as something that is complete physical, mental, social well-being, the World Health Organization say that, and they say it's not merely the absence of disease, but if we include spiritual well-being too, and environmental well-being, then our congregations need to be offering interventions in all 4 domains. So my research was all about whether they were doing that or not. So I did a survey of the kinds of missional interventions that churches were offering. And I had responses from 77 churches of different sizes and denominations. And I analysed them into 4 categories: spiritual, physical, mental health, and community health. And the analysis showed that churches who are the blue bars that you can see on that slide, the churches were doing quite well in spiritual interventions, as you probably would expect. And they were also doing quite well when it came to mental health interventions. But the one that was severely lacking, as you can see at the bottom there, was the physical health intervention level. And And very few churches had done very much of this in the previous 18 months that I was asking them to look at. I then compared those churches, those 77 churches, with 12 churches that had a parish nurse. And of course, the physical health interventions went up. You would expect that because they've got a nurse on their team. But so did all the other categories. And those are the lines in red. So the parish nurse churches are the bars that you can see in red compared with the 77 other churches, the bars you can see in blue. So what was surprising was that all of those interventions went up, not just the physical health and not just the mental health interventions. And if you want to look at that a little bit more, you can look at the book. There's a whole description of that research in the book. But there were some churches that had a lively program of social interactions, like toddler groups and seniors lunches, things like that. But what was a little bit sad was that they didn't connect these with any kind of spiritual interventions. In other words, those who attended these groups didn't get any kind of spiritual care. And I find that very sad, because we need to offer all 4 kinds of interventions across the piece from our churches. And we also need to consider our response to climate change if we're going to be truly holistic in our outreach. That's the book, and you can find a whole description of the research in there.
Well, Helen, we need to bring this to a close, and we certainly appreciate you joining us here today and sharing with us your insights and providing us with a wonderful presentation. It has helped us to better understand what it means to live as one who is spiritually whole, and to the importance of caring for the whole person. Your talk encourages us to deepen our faith and love in God and creation, one another, and ourselves as we wait with hope in the word of the Lord. A special thanks to my co-host Anne-Marie and Carol for keeping the conversation flowing, and to all the viewers who joined us from near and far. Until we meet again, may God bless all of you with health and wellness as you prepare for the coming of Christ. And with that, I'll say goodbye.